Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this Wheaton Conversation. I'm Pamela Weichman, your host and the Director of Education and Artist Services at WheatonArts. I'm a white female in my 30s with long brown hair and blue eyes. Tonight, I'm wearing a brown t-shirt. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm broadcasting from Southern New Jersey, which I recognize as traditionally the land of the Lenni Lenape. Our format for this episode is a webinar. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the program for your technical and general questions. Links to additional resources will also be posted in the chat throughout the program. If you would like to pose a question to the speakers, please do so using the Q&A feature. Should you lose connection for any reason, please close all windows, then click on your original email link to join again. Wheaton Conversations is presented by PNC Arts Alive, the United Nations International Year of Glass, and the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. We thank them for their support. Through membership, donations, and shopping at shop.wheatonarts.org, you as well can show your support. Please consider exploring these options so we can continue to offer free programs like this. It is my pleasure to introduce my co-host for this program, Alexander Rosenberg. Alex is a Philadelphia-based artist, educator, and writer. He is the director of the Glass Studio here at WheatonArts. Alex, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction, Pam. Thanks for Paige and Josefina for doing this. I'm really looking forward to this one. These two, I both kind of feel like I have some kind of connection to before they came as fellows. You know, Paige, I was saying we saw Paige in the studio for weeks working on a big project, but I know Paige as a colleague, another educator from Salem Community College and community member. And Josefina, I got calls when I started working at this program to say, this is the person, look out for this person. You're going to want to do something with her. So I'm super thrilled to have both of them. They both have a type of practice in glass, which is exciting to me, where glass becomes this kind of methodology to connect to other research areas and kind of research topics, I guess you could say. So I'm really excited to listen to them tell us more about their work, and I'm going to pass it off to Paige.
Thanks, Alex. Give me a sec to share this. All right, you can see my screen now. Great. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Paige, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist with a foundation in glass. And I'm currently based in Philly. I have a BFA from Tyler School of Art, where I also teach, and I received a MFA from VCU in 2020. I grew up in Northampton, Pennsylvania. As the middle child of two blue-collar workers, I find myself most curious about surveillance and labor, care and maintenance. These investigations are informed by various feminisms, found objects, popular media, and craft. And I view my practice as an ongoing method for unlearning my heteropatriarchal conditioning. In my work, I utilize material poetics, sound, and video performance to investigate alternative pleasures, resulting in remnants of unresolved desires. In 2019, I completed a body of work for VCU's Craft Material Studies candidacy exhibition, and this work was focusing on my family's malfunctioning support structure. We often forget the significance of the supportive role because it's traditionally viewed as subsequent and unessential, lacking value. So that was something that I was working through at that time. And this piece is actually the only glass piece from my grad school portfolio. It's a sintered casting, which means that the glass was fired at a lower temperature, allowing the particulates to retain their individual shape and texture while tack fusing together in a manner that should offer some structural integrity. When I do glass work for my practice, I like to make really precarious and fragile sculptures. For me, craft is an act of care. It is the catharsis of making that allows me to return to myself, and I'm open to using any process or material to convey the desired concept. So for instance, this piece culminated through the process of pleating, but I actually don't really know how to properly sew. When I was about 6, I had asked for a sewing machine for Christmas one year, and I received one, but no one would allow me to use it unless I had parental supervision, and no one actually wanted to sit down with me and watch me sew. So I actually used that machine for the first time in grad school and created this soft sculpture, which I was struggling with how to complete it. And while I was installing, my parents were there. They're actually very supportive, and my mom had offered her unsolicited advice on how it should be installed. And at that moment in time, I had already settled on the title being disagreeable. So it made this unintentional collaboration even more fitting. A lot of my work utilizes language in a variety of ways. And with this piece, I was thinking about how communication can fail and what it feels like to verbalize my vulnerabilities. This piece uses an Arduino and a sensor with a spit flap mechanism to create a sculpture that interacts with the viewers.
This is my first piece, actually. Which is one I made myself. It was kind of a weird thing, but yeah, it's so weird.
So this piece has boundaries, and when you approach it, it'll begin to speak, but there's no sound, just the sound of the images sort of rotating and tapping on one another. So it actually draws people in to lean in to hear if there's any voice. And when you get too close to it, it'll actually shut off.
This is my first piece, actually.
So moving on to my second year of grad school, I had been really exhausted by that intense first year. And I found myself that summer not really wanting to do anything in terms of making. And while I was at Pilchuck, I was seeing all of these old friends and colleagues who were really interested and enthusiastic about my practice and what it was I was doing. And I felt really guilty about not wanting to do anything at all. So I started joking that I was going to edit Dirty Dancing down to the moments where just the word baby is spoken. And then I actually decided to do that, which sort of began the crux of my thesis work. So here's that installation.
Baby, baby. Baby.
So the piece is titled Be My Little, and it's an intimate conversation between two televisions. The original film is about an hour and 40 minutes long. My version is approximately 24 seconds looped. In its entirety, the word baby is spoken approximately 48 times, 35 times by men and 13 times by women. And I was thinking about this mantra, baby, 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 which is very familiar to women and femme presenting individuals as we move through life being infantized and catcalled, reduced to objects of pleasure. So as I said, this piece was the catalyst for my thesis work, and most of my research at that time was rooted in popular media. And I spent a lot of time collecting moving images and sounds, which I was referring to as gendered gestures. Through those explorations, I quickly became captivated by the oohs and ohs, which break up the language of song. And I began to wonder how a wordless language could be communicated, could communicate both the misery and ecstasy of femininity. To say something without actually saying anything can create a linguistic paradox. And I was relating that back to the continual silencing of non-male voices. So this piece has several speakers laying on their back in the middle of the gallery, where they play a composition that's created from a digital collection of pop and rock songs. And the rhythm is derived from how sex researchers defined orgasms within staged models of sexual responses, such as Master and Johnson's four-phase model, which goes excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution, and then Kaplan's three-stage model, which is desire, excitement, and orgasm. The intention was to create a cacophony of female vocals that would fill a room and take up space and essentially refuse to be ignored. And what's interesting with that whole installation, not just this piece, is that I don't always realize how sexy some of my work is until after it's installed and I get to see people interact with it. And this whole installation happened a year after it was supposed to because of the pandemic. My thesis was postponed, and I actually think that only like 3 people were able to see it in person. And I was there with 2 of them, so I did get to experience a little bit of some like voyeur tendencies of watching an audience interact. So I was working with all these media-based works, and it actually led me back towards tangible materiality. I was discovering coded messages in these widely available media-based productions, and I had begun to wonder what aspects of patriarchal gendering did I have an intimate relationship with? And I started to ask myself the question, how is gender applied to my own body? So in this piece titled Uphold, I had compiled hundreds of quote unquote nude bra extenders to create a 7-foot-long soft sculpture. The bra backing component, if you're unfamiliar, is an extension of a bra. It's for bodies that don't fit a prescribed size. So it's actually something that we ask those individuals to then like purchase and add to this contraption. And each of these bra backing components, they clasp together to form a closed circuit with 2 cone-shaped mounds at either end, which are reminiscent of Madonna's iconic bra. So here is a detail of those clasps. And I was interested in this material because it is of the body, but as I mentioned before, more specifically, it's for certain bodies, becoming a necessary purchase for bodies that do not fit standard regulated sizes prescribed by patriarchal beauty myths. And it exists as an extension to a prescribed ideal and is also capitalized on by the market. It's essentially an additional cost, being a tax on those who don't fit in. And the color also I felt was really significant, as This is often labeled nude by many retailers, which reinforces whiteness as a standard. But even still, it's not the color of white skin either. So during my thesis semester, right before spring break, I had learned that I could rent a soundstage at BCU for a very small fee. So I'd rented the space for the entire week of spring break, and I filmed myself performing gender. I had a collection of clips of female dancers from all sorts of productions, including the work of Buzzley Berkeley, whose work used a large number of showgirls and props as fantasy elements in kaleidoscopic on-screen performances. And later in his career, during an interview, he was asked if he had a favorite showgirl that he preferred to work with, to which he responded, "A girl is a girl is a girl," which would later become the title of my thesis exhibition, as well as this video piece, which I consider to be ongoing. So I was trying to emulate the elegance and the grace of female dancers. It was an exhaustive attempt to achieve what Gia Tolentino refers to as the ideal woman. And in her book, Trick Mirror, Tolentino describes the ideal woman as conceptually overworked, an inorganic thing engineered to look natural, who seeks all the things that women are trained to find fun and interesting: domesticity, physical self-improvement, male approval, the maintenance of congeniality, and various forms of unpaid work. This was one of the last things I worked on before the shutdown. And while we were stuck at home, I took the footage and collaged it together to create a trio of myself. And in its entirety, with all the footage, the video is about an hour long, and it's sort of been abandoned. I'm not really sure where it goes from here. Like many other artists, I found that my creative motivations and interests got lost during the early stages of the pandemic. And much of what I endured in those following years has made it more and more difficult to connect the dots of my pre-pandemic brain. And I'm not generating ideas in the same way I did before. So that's sort of where I'm going to pause for now and let it send it over to Josefina.
Thank you, Paige. Thanks for sharing your work. Well, before starting, I would just like to thank Wheaton and everybody who made possible my residency here. It's really a great privilege to have the time and the chance to work in a place like this, with people like this, and with facilities like this. So I'm very happy about it. Just want to state that. To introduce myself, I'm a multidisciplinary artist from Chile. I have been working with glass for over 15 years, and I complement glass with other media as well. I did my undergrad in Santiago, Chile, and I got my master's from RISD. Usually my work, I do long-term research projects, and then based on my research, I create bodies of work that reference the things that I look in my research. Some of these projects are very specific and kind of like focused on a very particular period of time, whilst others have lasted years. So now I'm going to show you a little bit of my early work and then jump into some of more my ongoing and current ideas. Okay, can you see this properly? Yeah, okay. So my first work on glass was based on the study of forgotten places. For example, this is an old mining town in the Atacama Desert of Humberstone. This is an old whaling place in the south of Chile. I developed a body of work through a residency in Scotland at Northland, where I was studying the local architecture. This is an old croft house. Here you can see some images of the place there. I work with the local architecture of the more European spaces. These are some more technical studies where I'm looking into the depth of the material and layering images into more the areas of color, and not working on the top layer, but more like in depth, creating my own cityscapes, building spaces from locations that I had visited, that some are real, some are fake, some are invented. And basically, during all this first work in glass, I kind of like built my own working system and used different opportunities to develop further my technical questions. So for example, here I'm working at Bedix Glass Studios in Germany, where they do large-scale architectural glass. And there I learned how to work with kind of like the proper materials and technical capacities that I didn't have access at home. They have a long-lasting tradition of, in Germany, in Europe in general, of stained glass, which now they have developed towards more architectural work. So it really merged with my interest in architecture. This is my first work with a silver stain, and I'm also referencing local Scottish construction. After on, when I went to grad school, instead of representing architecture through painting on glass, I began building architectural interventions and compositions. So I did a series of bodies of work where I'm building structures that layer and work in the same way that my glass compositions would, but in a more, in a larger scale, where you would not only see the piece, but actually experience the piece. These are some examples of those. So it was really interesting, the experience, the experience in graduate school of unlearning everything and starting from scratch. I think that's kind of like a common thing that for grad school. And really, I had gone to grad school to learn more about glass because I didn't have access to that at home, and I went to a very particular program that was glass focused, of course. And it was interesting that I ended up working with plaster and plastic and other materials, and not necessarily glass, as you see in these pieces. And then after grad school, and during grad school, I was basically questioning the idea of space. During previous years, I was looking at architecture and thinking about it. And then whilst writing my thesis, I was really evaluating the idea of not having architecture and not having permanent construction. And right after school, I went to do some research with contemporary nomadic communities in northwest Kenya, in Turkana. And there, my idea was to study their migration cycle and try to understand the movement process. The why of the movement, the when, the how, and mainly the building process behind it. So that was a really long project. It was a full year. The research was a couple of months, and then I did 3 different residencies where I developed the artwork around it. So I'm gonna jump into a video that it's a long video. So I'm just gonna go to a clip that that speaks better of the actual work that I did there. It's only gonna be 2 minutes of this video. I think it's better that I show it rather than summarize it. It goes from here.
The exhibition is divided in different sections, and the idea is to guide the visitor through different aspects that I was studying while at Turkana. So at the entrance, we have a series of 6 pictures here and 2 more outside that just give a kind of like a documentation of the daily life with the Turkana nomadic communities. So in these 2 series, I present a study of the Turkana Akai. Akai means house in Turkana. And the idea of having this series is to evidence the different kind of constructions they have there. It's very interesting to see how in one same tribe you have very different kind of buildings. It's in some way they all have their own personality. I mean, they're unique pieces. For me, I see them as very much as sculptural shapes, which have a lot of detail and craft in the manufacture. In this picture, I present myself inside the wooden structures to reference the idea of the relationship between the structure and the body. I have these 2 drawings where I'm very much oriented to the details of the connections that make up these units. So in this one, this piece is graphite with watercolor. I make a very detailed analysis of the connections between the branches. For me, it's very important to show that this is a serious study. I've not only just been playing with branches, but actually I've been playing, that's truth, but I've also been studying the way the Turkana people make their constructions and how they with very simple materials, they make very complex and intricate shapes. So here what I've done is take a photography of the structures and then digitally erased all the background so you can really focus on the structure. I was migrating with the Turkana. I took a lot of videos of every step of the process. The packing, the moving, the settling, the building, all of it. And then upon revising this footage, I came across the image of the women, the Turkana women carrying these metal boxes through the desert. And for me, that image was very poetic, and I felt that I had somehow to work with it. One of the daily activities that the Turkana women.
Okay, so after the project with in Turkana, I really got that was a really powerful experience, and the work I created there and the ideas that I developed there, I'm still working on. I think it's one of those things that they come back in thought and are recurrent within your practice. So after the Turkana project, I was thinking a lot about isolation and how Turkana was very disconnected from everything that I had experienced before. And that is when I began my island project, where I have since been studying physical islands, so geographical islands, some surrounded by water and some not. So I began that with the Rabbit Island residency, where I went to Rabbit Island, which is in Lake Superior in Michigan. And I stayed in complete isolation in this island for a month, where it was not like surviving in an island. It was more like experiencing the place in complete isolation and really embracing the sense of being by yourself. And then years after, I believe that a lot of people experienced that during the pandemic, because a lot of people were forced into that. While I did this residency, something that I looked for. So during this period of time, I was by myself and I was embracing solitude and looking into the land and the territory, the flora, the fauna, the waves, the light, the water, every single aspect of the island. But I didn't create work at the island. I did it afterwards. So after my time in the island, I went to a local college where I worked at their glass studio, and I did this body of work that referenced my experience at the island. So it was very simple. It was 3 pieces. One that had mirrors that resembled the topography of the water. So it's what I call water topographies. And you would look at them, but then you would see your own reflection. Then the wall pieces, they were mirrorized as well, and you would see the lines, and each one was representing one of the days I was at the island. There's some close details of that. And then the wall pieces that you see here, they are those double-sided mirrors that you see your own reflection till the light inside turns on, and then you can see what's actually inside. So all of this is referencing the experience at the island. And then I've done other projects that still, you know, refer to that are framed within the island studies. For example, Canelo Alto is this other one I did in this very rural area in Chile, where I worked with a community called Canelo Alto, where everybody was migrating. So it's a small little caserío, which means it's not even a town. It's just like a group of houses at the end of a hill, where only a few elder people were left behind, and all the young people had gone to the main city. So I stayed with the elders for some time, sharing time with them and doing a photography project with them. And then I worked with the kids in the local school, the ones that had left, and I did a photography project, and I compiled their experience and their vision of the migration. So in this project, I'm trying to see the vision of both of them. And here are some images of that. So the first part is of the elder in their daily living, and then I have some of the work I did at the school with the kids, and I was teaching them photography, and then we were using some very simple photo transfer processes to create light boxes that they assembled in this light installation work. And here is some images of how I use this research of Canelo, of the island and different places to develop this kind of like ongoing body of work related to the islands and the topographies, geographies, and all the nuances of these places that I visit and I research. This is some images of the emerging artist in residence I did at Tiltec some years ago. And there I'm using the photographies from Canelo, of this gentleman who recently passed, to do his portrait on glass. And then here I'm representing not only the geography and the topography, but also the people that inhabit the place. There's some details. The lines are gold luster, and then the images is embedded within the glass. This is another example of some print work I did at Illinois State University, where I worked with their map collection to develop more of my work that I've done in Kenya, and some other projects. So I'll stop now to see if we have any questions or comments, and see. I'll stop sharing. See if we have. We can stop for a second before we keep on showing our slides and have a little bit of a conversation.
Yeah, and to those of you tuning in at home, feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A, and we will answer them. But I guess before we move on and before any of those pop in, I actually kind of had a pretty general one for both of you, and I just wanted to talk. I was thinking about this specifically, Josefina, when you were talking about learning to build these kind of structures, like learning this kind of craft tradition that on the fly. And I wanted to, but both of you kind of working in different kind of material practices, but starting in glass or kind of related to glass. Can you talk a little bit about how the one tradition might kind of influence the way that you learn another, or is there like a glassy approach to making this kind of structure? Or is there a glassy approach to working in sound specifically? Those are kind of some of the things that I was thinking about.
Interesting question, Alex. The thing is that I don't really come from a glassy background, if you want to put it that way. like at home where I went to art school and where I studied, there is no glass art. So glass is something that I looked for, and it's not that I stumbled upon it. So I learned other media before learning glass. And I guess that is why I really appreciate all the technical aspects of it, but at the same time, I'm not very technical in the way I work, because I know that like a broader range of possibilities of materials. And also in that sense that I feel that there's a technique for everything, you know, like even in things that you might feel that are random, they are not. Like for example, in the what you were saying, the building those structures. At the beginning, when I was, you know, cutting branches, I was like making a mess, and because I was doing it incorrectly. I was not doing the right angle and things like that. And then I realized, and I was taught how to cut the branches properly. And the same thing happens with glass. You know, you can do something 1,000 times, but you do it incorrectly, and it will take you way longer than if you learn the little tricks behind it. And I think that's kind of like you can apply that in a general sense to every media. You know, there's a technique and a craft behind things that once you master, it really can make a big difference. I don't know, Paige, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think for me, I have sort of like a two-part answer to that question. And the first part is that conceptually, I think glass has so many dualities to it. It can be so many different things. And I find myself applying that lens often to my choice of materials. So I like the idea of playing with how something can be fragile yet structurally sound, or how something could be sort of like soft yet like sharp, like that the black piece, the leg piece is very sort of like fuzzy and soft looking, but it's also like kind of prickly and hard to handle because it has all these little bits of glass that can become embedded in the skin. So yeah, conceptually, like glass and its ability to be all of the things at once, that's sort of how I feel like I'm always approaching my work conceptually with glass in mind, even if the end product isn't glass. But in terms of technique, one of the things that I tell my students, especially when we're in the hop shop, is that glass is a great equalizer because everyone is bad at it at first. And I also think like that was something that was really hard for me when I was first learning, but now having, I guess like a decade of glass experience, it's easier for me to look back on that and find, I guess like inspiration and motivation to try things that I don't know, because there's something magical about like the first glass piece that you made, right? Like it's so clunky and like odd, but you'll never be able to recreate it again. And I think about that when I try new things like collaging the video together. Like I don't really know how to like properly light a studio to take a proper video or like properly edit and collage video together, but I still did it. And like there's some successes in there, and there's also something to be said about the failure. And I think that's another thing that kind of wraps into glass, like how many of us have broken something and then sort of like resurrected the broken pieces to become a new piece. So yeah, I don't know. It gives glass in a weird way, while it's like beaten me down in so many instances, it's also given me a lot of confidence to try new things and to like be willing and accepting of like failing.
Thank you for that. We also have one more in the Q&A. This is coming from Fallon Ward. It reads, I know you both just started your fellowship, but what are you interested in making and experiencing while here?
Yeah, I actually talk about that a little bit more in like my second half of my slides. But to kind of like briefly give an overview, I'm really interested in playing with texture. That's something that I've kind of been like circling the past like couple years. So I'm trying to figure out new ways that I can like take glass and form it so that it has I want to say like a texture that I haven't seen before, or maybe even just like a texture that will put some sort of visual language to an emotion for me. So that's super vague and maybe like very personal. So when I like talk more in a little bit, hopefully that'll clear some things up. But I would say a lot of play and experimentation while I'm here.
Yeah, I think I can echo what you're saying in terms of play and experimentation. On my side, I will also show some images that can give more visuals of what I want to accomplish. But in a general sense, I want to process the research I've developed in the past years related to Southern Patagonia Islands, where I've spent most of my research recently. And I want to work in kind of like, I have two lines of work I want to pursue, one with a flame working and the other one with a kiln. So it's going to be kind of like a two ongoing projects that hopefully will intertwine with each other.
I actually had a question for you, Fina. I found the Rabbit Island residency and that like choice of isolation very interesting. And I was just curious if you could speak to the difference between like choosing to be isolated and then like the forced isolation that like many of us experienced during the pandemic, and if you did experience that, if there were like similarities or differences.
Yeah, well, I think that as a creator, usually artists spend a lot of time, we spend a lot of time alone, you know, at studio and doing our work. Sometimes we might be social individuals that also need time in isolation to generate ideas and process thoughts and generate work. So in that sense, I've always had that in my kind of like my way of working. I've always spent long periods of time by my own. So it wasn't something new for me. I mean, it was the first time on a geographical island, but it wasn't the first time that I spent extended period of time by myself. And then I had a lot of ideas about how I would, you know, embrace this time. And it was, at the end, I thought it was such a privilege and a luxury to have that, you know, to be in an environment where, first of all, I felt safe. And I felt that I counted with that time, because I knew that at the end of that 1 month, I was going to go and develop work around what I was experiencing. So that was also very inspiring to put ideas and try to develop thoughts into the experience, and not just, you know, live the moment without giving it a second thought, which might have been different from what a lot of people experienced years later during the pandemic, where people were unprepared or unwilling to be by themselves, people that not necessarily enjoy solitude. I think it's quite different, and it was proven to be quite hard for many to be disconnected from communities and from loved ones without the genuine willingness to do so. So I think that it's the forced isolation versus the voluntary are quite different. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Do you want to share, Paige, what are you intending to do in the residency and some more of your work?
Yeah, let me pull that up. Right. So kind of like, I guess not really like post-pandemic, but sort of around the time that we started to like trickle back into to working and social lives. I really found myself trying to figure out how I could work through the grief that I was experiencing and reconstruct the way that my artist brain could work. And I was beginning new explorations into uncertainty and impermanence, some of which trickled into a recent exhibition I had at Fleischer Art Memorial in Philly this past winter, which stemmed from their Dina Wind Foundation, which they refer to as the Wind Series exhibition. And I'm still in the midst of all of the figuring and meaning making that's associated with these creative transitions in my practice. And these are just some like sketches essentially. And actually the piece, I'm not sure what side it will be on all your screens, but the green piece that I'm holding in my hand is a glass piece. And that's actually something that I'm working on making a little bit more sizable and a little bit more structural while I'm here. So very excited to get that going. So while I'm still trying to find the language to describe these new explorations, it's fairly evident to me, at least, that the work is manifesting as active processing of the past few years. And I think that everyone can kind of agree that there's been both collective and individual trauma experienced during that time that we may be unpacking for quite some bit. But like this piece in particular is a cast soap fountain that essentially, as time went on, it took the form of a extremely sudsy baptismal basin. And when I was creating this piece, I was thinking a lot of absolution and the idea of like washing your hands of a specific situation and letting it go. So working through grief in the bits of research I've done, trying to understand it, I was learning that grief is a lot of things and it takes a lot of forms, but mostly it's a learning process. We mostly associate grief with the loss of a loved one, but these losses can take many different forms. And when we actually form a relationship, whether that relationship is romantic or platonic, our brains encode the idea of you and me into an us. So when a relationship ends, we feel like we've lost a part of ourselves, and it is because the coding in our brain is coming undone. And this was a very strong feeling that I had experienced while grieving, and I was having a difficult time putting language to it. So one of the ways that I was working through that was through collage, and I did a lot of collaging, like on a small scale, like in sketchbooks. So these larger pieces were kind of like the first time that I had shown two-dimensional work or like made what felt like paintings and was exhibiting that. So it felt very vulnerable and like new and a little intimidating to work on such a flat scale, even though I've done like video and that is like flat on a screen. This felt very foreign to me. So there's a range of emotions associated with grieving, and commonly there's panic, anxiety, and sadness, but we don't often discuss that there's a difficulty in concentrating that's associated with grief, and that the only relief to a lot of these symptoms is time. And in our society, we're not always willing to create space for this. And that's kind of what I believe that I was attempting to do in a lot of the recent explorations using imagery and textures to create visuals of the layers of emotions my brain was sorting through while processing the loss of a friendship and my like pre-pandemic life. So during my time here as a fellow, I plan to experiment with the structural limitations of glass through kiln-based processes. And I'm mostly interested in employing glass techniques as a method for constructing sculptures that mimic these emotional instabilities we all experience. So thinking about how healing is an act of self-preservation, I'm aiming to navigate despair through material poetics, specifically despair's ability to lie dormant and to return unannounced. And it is a process that I hope will reveal alternative pleasures while also offering further insight regarding the intimacies of our public and private relationships, which is something that I've noticed to be like the common thread in my work. It always sort of comes back to relationships for me, whether that's the relationship with myself, relationship with my family, or even the relationship with institutions such as the gender binary, which I know I talk a lot about in my older work. So yeah, those are the things that I'll be thinking about for the next 6 weeks.
That's exciting, Paige. I'm looking forward to see how do you develop all these ideas. Okay, so I guess I'll also share the second part of slides I have. First, I wanna go into a project that I did last year around the same time. Wait, I need to share my screen first, sorry. Okay, there we go. Which, so as I said earlier, I've been doing research on Southern Patagonia Island for some time. And last year I was presented with the opportunity to collaborate with a scientist that's doing a really interesting scientific research in Patagonia with the lady in the picture. Her name is Delphine Van Hacke. And the idea of this project was to connect art and science, or to make science approachable to communities through the arts. Okay, so my challenge was to take her research and share it with local communities of very rural and impoverished areas with my art. So the project consisted in first understanding her research, which is based on environmental DNA, which basically what she does is she takes water samples of ocean water, and then with that she processes it in the lab and identifies the local mammals in the water. So first I understood all that, and then I went to local communities and schools to develop a work that was not only technical in terms of all the DNA, but that it was also trying to challenge kids and also adults to look beyond that and to look at their territory and their geographies in a different way. So for example, here in the first step, I'm going to local schools in very rural, very, very isolated islands of Patagonia, where I'm kind of like the ambassador of the project, and I'm teaching them about the DNA. We're using Legos to tell them about, you know, how the DNA is structured. And then we're actually going, I got the support of the Navy to go and get the water samples with the kids. So we did kind of like this school trip where we went outside to the ocean and the kids were taking the samples that were afterwards sent to the lab to be studied and to be part of the research. So these are middle school kids. So that was one part of it, working with school kids in the science aspect. And then I was teaching them how to work with printmaking. We were working with lino cuts. And then they were representing their experience, not only of what they learned about the environmental DNA, but their experience in the boat and in the taking of the water samples. For example, here you have one of the kids that he's representing the boat and what that meant for him. And then I also worked in other local communities where I went to the shores of the island and took the water samples and did kind of like these community-based printmaking sessions where each individual was invited to represent what they were filtering through the water. And then all this I took to the studio, back to the mainland. This is the studio that I was given at the local museum, Museo Regional de Aysén. And there I did this large-scale installation, which was based of this. There were 96 light boxes, each one representing one of the participants in the different community-based activities. And at the end, the idea was to represent the research through the eyes of the people that live in the community. So here you have, for example, the small samples of the kids, and then some, for example, this is a photography of a local one architect that lives in one of the islands. And then all this came together in this installation that was made with very simple materials. The outside tubes are, the ones you use to do piping in houses. Just plastic tubes that I cut in different sizes. And the overall piece looks like this. And then you have a general view of what it looks like with the lights and everything. So you have, on one side, you have the geography, then you have the part of the real research, some of the results obtained by the scientists, some of the visions of the kids, the experience in the boat, some samples of the real animals that were identified in the environmental DNA and so on. So this research, this project is part of of the island project, and I feel it really narrows down what I want to accomplish here, in the sense that it touches on what I'm interested on, but it also connects and engages with the community, which I think is it's where I want to take my work. Not only thinking about my ideas and my not only about my ideas, but also connecting with people around me. There's another video of that. And then here I'll just go briefly through this, the concept that I'm trying to develop. That it doesn't really translate to English. In Spanish, it's called maritorio, which is the connection between the word mar, which means ocean, and territorio, which means the territory. So it's the understanding of a territory that's not only land, but also ocean, and everything that happens between these two spaces, so the land, the water, and everything in between. And that's what I'm looking into at the Patagonia Islands. So this is where I've been working lately. This is Navarino Island, the southernmost inhabited island. This is with the Yagan community in the Villa Ujica. This is the local landscape. These are some explorations that I've developed so far, and these are some ideas that I want to keep on exploring while here at Wheaton. Some textures, line work. Some are real geography, some are not. I want to recreate these topographies with a flame working. And yeah, I think I'll wrap it up with this one image of Puerto Aguirre.
That was so wonderful to hear a little bit more about both of your practices and a little bit more about the future. We will once again open it up for a little bit if anybody at home wants to ask questions. I think I wanted to ask you about this notion of field work, Josefina, and kind of how that figures into it. It seems like as your projects have evolved, there's been more and more of this aspect of kind of like working a site and then kind of bringing it back to another location and kind of turning that into work. And then even in that most recent piece, there's this kind of aspect of an archive. Can you talk a little bit about like what the other research practices that you look at, or what that kind of looks like to kind of inform how you do that kind of work?
Yeah, well, I think that I began that without really realizing I was doing that. At the beginning, when I first began my art career, I was traveling a lot to learn about glass, techniques of glass, because I didn't have access to that at home. I was traveling different places to take different workshops and so on, scholarships, etc., to learn. And then I realized that my interest was not really necessarily on the techniques, but actually on what I was seeing in these different places. And that was the main thing that was informing my work. And then I feel that became kind of like a working methodology, of going somewhere, seeing something, and then processing that information. And it really, it's really like it never ends, because the more you see, the more questions you have, and the more questions you have, the more you want to do, and so on. And then once, like for example, this island project, for me, it's really fascinating because I see each island as a metaphor of something bigger, something larger. So at the end, when I'm I don't know, referencing a very particular island, I'm not really talking about that one place. I'm talking about something broader that expands beyond that one location that I'm at the moment. So it's a symbol for other things. And in terms of the field work, it's very organic, like a location, being in a location by yourself alone is not the same than being in a community with young kids or being, with elderly. It's very different, or if you can speak the language or not, it really changes. So I think as an artist, as a creator, you have to be flexible and try to understand what is your role within a community or a place, and what is it that you can actually contribute to the location, and what is it that you can take from it as well for your, for your personal development and from your artwork as well. That's how I approach it.
That was wonderful. And then Paige, I wanted to ask you, through all of the work that I've been seeing you, there's been these kind of moments of language popping up. And in the last section, you even talked about this idea of kind of lacking the language for grief. Mm-hmm. And I guess I was curious about that. Like can some of these objects stand in for language, or there's I think there's a lot of work that's about like lacking of language. And maybe talk a little bit more about how your practice deals with that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of art making a lot of the time is like language oftentimes fails us. There's a lot of things that like we don't have language for, or we like. I'm gonna maybe like kind of like equate this to pronouns for a moment, but like even just the idea of pronouns and like she, he, or they, like how much that has changed in the past year. And if we think of in terms of like the trans community, even like a lot of the language we have now to describe those things didn't exist even like 5-10 years ago, or they weren't as common knowledge as it is now. So I find myself a lot of the times thinking about the ways in which language does fail me, whether that's like an inability to communicate, or issues dealing with like conflict, or something that's very common in my family is deflecting. And I just feel like if we think about like art in like its very extensive history, it came about with like the cave drawings as like a way to leave written word behind, which we didn't have then. So I don't know. It's something for me that when I can't figure out what it is that I'm feeling or thinking, and I can't like put language to it, like if I'm thinking about what that looks like visually in my mind's eye, it's just like a fog. Getting my hands on something and being able to construct something will allow me to like put those thoughts into an object. And then I think it gives the object that meaning, even if I still don't know what it is I'm trying to say. Because then also we can think about it as like, once we've made the object, and if we're so lucky to like send it out into the world and let it exist in like a gallery or a museum setting, even if there is a placard next to it of like very thoughtfully crafted paragraph of what it is that the artist is thinking about, not everyone's reading that. So the object has to be able to stand on its own. And I think that that's another interesting layer of information, and something we get to experience too as makers, if we're accepting of it, is being a collaborator with the viewer of our work. Because while I can put whatever it is that I'm thinking about into a piece, you're coming at it with a whole different set of experiences and knowledge, and you're going to read it in a different way. And my goal is that hopefully, regardless of my intent and your takeaway, like there's still something that on like a human level can be relatable about the work. I guess maybe too, that's why I'm like so interested right now in emotion, because for the most part, we all can kind of like gauge people's feelings, especially when we're in the same place, even if someone isn't being completely obvious about how they're feeling. There's things that we can pick up on just by being like empathetic and aware.
Thank you both. I think, yeah, I think maybe that might be a good spot to kind of wrap it up on. I just want to thank you both again for being a part of this, and I'm so looking forward to spending more time with the two of you in the studio in the coming weeks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you. It was exciting to hear of the influences on your work. That was truly special. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. For those of you who would like to stay in tune with what Josefina and Paige are doing within their practices, we have their handles up here for social media, as well as their website. So please do follow them if you would like to learn more. And of course, I encourage everybody to register for our next Wheaton Conversation. Our next Wheaton Conversation is with Eleanor Bullock and Alex Kolan-Olanian. They will be joining us on Thursday, June 15th. So there is time, but please do register as soon as you can. And as always, we thank you for joining us. And if you would like to learn more about Wheaton Arts, please visit our website at wheatonarts.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program, I am more than willing to have a conversation with you about that. You can email me at pweichman@wheatonarts.org. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a lovely day. Bye everybody.